Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are in our 31st consecutive year, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished in the past, what they might be planning for the future. It's a wider net than only writers, however. We have had on other brands of artists. We've had on sculptors, we've had on painters, musicians, quite a wide net. So if you have an idea for a writer for the Writer's Block or another brand of artists whom you think might fit our program, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be very happy to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming out of 1623 Studios is a result of cable access television. So you stick with cable. Don't go for any other way to connect with the internet. You stick with the cable and this wonderful community service. Tonight, I'm very happy to say we have a return visitor by the name of Sharon Chace. And in case you forgot her background, I'm going to read the brief bio from her latest book. Sharon is a writer and artist. During graduate school at Weston Jesuit School of Theology, where she was a Protestant wildcard, professors helped her identify her calling and hone her voice in poetry. She is now working on a forthcoming volume of poetry expected later in this year, 2021, and we'll be talking to her about her most recent publication, which came out in 2020. Sharon Chace, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Thank you. I guess I can talk now. I want to go by all the rules. Thank you very much for having me.
Good. It's nice to have you back. I'm going to show your book immediately. And when I do, our editor will substitute a JPEG of the cover so that it will be much clearer, but I'll hold it up anyway. This is biblical poems embedded in biblical narratives. And it is available on Amazon. And I know after our program, the sales will skyrocket, Sharon. Tens of thousands. This is not a regular book of poetry. It's more of a workshop book on how to interpret and read found poems, really, in the Bible. Can you tell us when you got this idea and how it grew and how you formulated it?
Okay, I don't usually get to things in a straight line, but basically it started about 2017 when I became Poet Laureate of Rockport.
Which you still are, correct?
Which I still, yes. And I thought, well, illogical, that's not usually a word I use. Well, a good synthesis of my late in life would be to look at biblical poems embedded in biblical narratives. And further back, when I took the prayer in the Bible with John Casselman at Western Jesuit School of Theology, we looked at embedded prayers. And the distinction between prayer and poems is not always that clear cut. So that was also a piece of this. It was called contemplative prayer in the Bible, and we looked at, as I say, embedded prayers as opposed to standalone prayers, which are poems. They're somewhat synonymous. The Psalms are standalone poems.
The Psalms are songs and poems, and
yes.
They are presented as such.
Yes, and in the Bible, depending upon your translation, some poems you can find easily because they're indented, but they're not always indented. So some are more deeply embedded than are others. Some translations are pretty good at indenting. The New Revised Standard Version is good. The Message Bible that many clergy love, it blots out parallelism, it blots out poetry, has little regard for poetry. The Living Bible is another example. The translator of that said that Americans don't trust poetry. So his poetry in the Living Bible isn't indented. And I got that from Martin Marty from an issue of Context some years ago.
So when a poem is indented, does that mean that it's generally or when a scripture is indented, does that mean it was recognized in the original writing as a poem, or is that a subsequent editor's decision?
That is the editor's decision. However, as I think it was Robert Alter said, movement is a common, which is a feature of poetry, is the way the original audience would have heard the poem. So that's a very good question. Certainly the Psalms, I think, would be seen. But the prophets, I can't really answer that because I'm not in that situation. The classic, early on, people wouldn't have been so inclined to see poetry in the Bible, but Philo of Alexander, a Greek philosopher, started comparing David to Moses and the classic Greeks. So the real answer is I can't answer that completely.
I have a question from your introduction, a term that I'm not familiar with. You say that this may be read or may be treated Lectio Divina. What does that term mean?
It's a practice of prayer. And Dan Harrington, the now late Dan Harrington, who was one of my New Testament professors at Western Jesuit School of Theology, has written about it. It's practiced by Catholics and some Protestants. Reverend Derek Van Goulden at the Congregational Church in Rockport uses it. And it's where a passage is read very quietly and meditatively, and then you zero in on phrases that stand out to you as being very important. It doesn't have to be connected with historical, critical, biblical studies. Dan Harrington, of course, connected it with critical biblical studies, which means paying attention to the passage in terms of its situation in life, what scholars call sits in Laban, the provenance, the human authors, the when, where, why, and how of when this biblical passage was created. You don't have to do that with Lectio Divina, but I think if the clergy person is up to it, I think it's good to start with some historical criticism because then it keeps reactions from being too far-fetched.
So a person reading Lectio Divina can emphasize words or phrases according to how that person interprets or feels the spiritual importance of the passage.
It'd be considered reader response criticism, yes. Interestingly, for a while before the pandemic, I was doing different poetry sessions with people at the Denmark. And when I read Mary Oliver's poem, Wild Geese, people responded to it very much like they would have if a minister had been reading, leading Lectio Divina. They really grabbed on to some words. The funny one was one elderly gentleman really loved the words "don't have to be perfect" because he assured me he was not.
Yeah, so that's good to know. Good to know you don't have to be perfect. How long did it take you to finish and do the research, the considerable research for this book?
About 4 years, I think. However, in a way, I'd been doing it ever since 1994, 1998, when I graduated from Western, because I keep reading and I seem to have an inner editor that kind of guides me to save the right stuff in messy piles. So it was a lot of backdrop to actually writing it. And I still have my footnote pile over here by the couch. And
good. Well, it seems to work for you. Can you take a passage out of here that refers to a particular piece of scripture and tell us how this would work in a workshop setting or a teaching setting.
Okay, I think I will go to I was going to go to a passage in First Peter, and now, of course, it seems to have disappeared. Okay. I did so much to prepare, now I can't find that First Peter passage. I guess I could actually look in the table of contents. Okay. Philippians. I don't like it that I'm this pokey to, well, let me go to continuity of a blessing.
What page is that, Sharon?
This would be pages 52 to 53. And
So, excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but I want to make sure our audience understands it. You intend this book to be a guide to use in teaching poetry in the Bible. And
yes,
it might be in a secular setting or it might be in a religious setting, but you're talking about research in this ancient text, or you're talking to people who are believers and they are reading or want interpreted God-given text. Either it would work in either situation, I gather.
it's mainly the introduction and the epilogue are for clergy and professors. But the book may gain a second audience in the participants in the class. If I were to lead this class, I would hope that all the participants would have a copy. I would hope that some might want to read the introduction, but they wouldn't have to. And at the first session, I would summarize my own introduction and then have people introduce themselves and introduce the concept and have people basically introducing themselves. I think what I will do right now, because I couldn't find the passage I'd most want to talk about, I will go to chapter 3. Jesus learns from his mother Mary.
Okay, what page again?
That's on page 32.
32, okay.
I will fast forward to the questions at the end. Now, this is the passages where Jesus opens the scroll in the temple and reads from Isaiah about this. In the synagogue, Jesus reads this: "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord." Basically, the idea is, well, Jesus learned that from his mother Mary, because the Magnificat or Mary's song or Mary's poem expresses some of the same concerns about the reversals of the poor and the marginalized people.
Okay.
And also in this passage, it makes clear that that Jesus is seen as the light of the world. And so for phrases that stand out to you that could be addressed by the leader leading Lectio Divina or going to journal writing. And I myself would probably go with a journal writing because I'm a writer. But I will read you the questions that people could
Okay.
on page 36. Okay. What phrases stand out to you? That could be Lectio Divina and stop there. Okay, but after that, if you wanted to do journal writing or you want to jump right into journal writing, how about this question, which is a very bridge building question? Are the words a light for revelation, abstract or concrete? If you are Christian, does the understanding of Jesus as God incarnate suggest concrete? If you are not Christian, is it possible to understand Jesus as a light for revelation and a more universal affirmation? Put another way, if you are humanist, is it possible to consider Jesus to be the light of the world without believing in Christian doctrine?
So these are questions that you might pose about the subjects in any poem, analyzing a poem.
That's correct.
And it doesn't make any difference if you're a humanist or a Christian or none of the above.
Some parts of the Bible would certainly assume that you were more Christian than others, but there are more passages. There are passages in the Bible that I think suggest a universal implication.
And just in general, I want to point out that you talk about passages both from the Gospels and from the Acts. So letters to the
Yes,
Corinthians,
gospel and
for
letters.
instance, or something from Luke.
Yes, Luke being a synoptic gospel,
Yes.
one of the synoptic gospels, and John being a slightly different kind of gospel, and Acts, Luke and Acts are considered sort of a 2-volume set, same author basically.
Uh-huh.
And the letters of Paul, 1 Corinthians.
Okay. So do you want to continue with those questions?
I could read you the other questions because I had mentioned a picture where Jesus, where Mary is being greeted by Elizabeth and his little dog there looking all happy. And I talked about that painting. But the third question is, what about a time when you would not likely have used the word calling, but you felt happy because of fulfilling a task or project? Name the time in your life when you felt most competent. What does that tell you about what you think is God's will or the most logical suggestion of your present calling or activities? Was there foreshadowing by experiences early in your life? Question 4, if your life has already found you and you are doing what you were meant to do, how did you find your way?
So these are meditative questions,
Meditate.
as well as questions that might be applied to the poetry or to any poem, really.
I think so. Jesus set out his mission when he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he anointed me to bring good news to the poor. That's Jesus's mission statement, but we're not all going to have exactly that same mission statement, so to speak.
Right, right. Yes. Tell me what made you decide on what passages to treat in this book and which ones to analyze.
Well, I went with passages that have some connection to what we do today, benedictions, blessings, that sort of thing. And so it's not exactly logical, but that's as close as logic as I get. In the section, the continuity of a blessing, I had a very interesting note from Jocelyn McWhirter, who is the chair of the religion department at Albion College, where I did my undergraduate work. And in the very last part of it, I talked about blessings. The most famous one, probably, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And then I talk about different benedictions in the Bible. And two of the questions, I'll read you the questions that follow looking at different benedictions in the Bible.
What page is this on?
Page 54.
Okay.
What words or phrases stand out for you? Do you feel empowered by the benediction in your church? Why or why not? What helps you to bless life? Do you want to write a benediction? Well, I wrote a benediction, and put it at the end, and I think I'd like to get out the note, if that's okay, we do, that Jocelyn wrote to me.
Sure.
It's in my folder of trying to be prepared. Okay. Card, nice card for an art major. Okay. I enjoyed reading it. My favorite part is the blessing you wrote for your memorial service. It moves me to think of you imagining your death and wanting to bless those you will leave behind. So at the very end, I wrote a benediction. I also wrote a poem about my best wishes for readers in any faith tradition.
Okay, before we go on to that, I want to make sure our viewers have got this right. You wrote a benediction intended to be used at your funeral.
Yes, I did.
Was that difficult?
No, it wasn't. It was one of the shortest things I've ever written in my life. But, you know, I'm a crock-pot writer. I stew a lot, and I'm slow to warm up. And so sometimes when things come out real fast, they've been stewing in there for a long while.
Yeah. Well, okay, now go on. I wanted to make sure our readers understood the novelty of writing one's own funeral.
Yeah. Anyway, it's very short. God's peace will sustain you on your walk into ongoing life. Go forth, trusting that joy comes in the morning. Amen.
As you say, brief.
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 Yep. Should I read you the poem I wrote that expresses my wishes for readers in any faith tradition?
Please.
Greetings. May each seeker find a greeter, and with a passing of peace into it welcome. At the portal of the holy, open door is invitation to rest and rejoice in the beauty of holiness, the beauty of color, the beauty of light, the realm of God.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Tell me, when you're looking at the Bible and you know that it was originally in different languages from different people and different groups of people, is it difficult to see an individual's poetry intentions through the Bible, or is that more what we want to see in it?
You mean from the writer? I think Walter, the Catholic scholar Hans Ernst Officer, is right when he said what the prophets want to say can only be said in prose, in poems. I messed that quote up, really, but were the authors of Jeremiah and Isaiah aware that they were writing poetry? I don't know, but they were. And when you read the poetry, it condenses, it summarizes, it has heightened imagination. I don't know if that helps answer the question.
Yes, it does.
I think the Bible is a very ancient book. Well, I know it's a very ancient book. To my mind, it's important to think, well, the Bible may be written for us, but it wasn't written to us. In the Gospel of John, you're overhearing an intramural battle of the Jews who left the conservative synagogue up the street and joined the Jewish synagogue down the street. When you're reading the letters to Paul, to the first church, Corinth, which is first, that's the way I put it, the Church of Corinthians or the assembly, you're reading his letter to a divided congregation, more divided than we are in the Trump administration, past Trump administration, in Congress today, even still. So you're reading somebody else's mail, really.
Uh-huh.
when it comes to letters.
Well, yeah, well put. Yeah.
Or you're reading somebody else's intramural fight, or in the Sermon on the Mount, that's probably as close as you can get to Jesus' actual words, but you're reading the selected poems and passages of Matthew, who was a very good editor.
Good editor, Matthew, the editor, yes.
Yeah, picked
Well,
out.
well, it's a good fresh way to look at that.
Yeah, picked out from his metaphorically speaking manuscript piles the sayings of Jesus.
Well, I want to say again, this book I think is very helpful from poet's point of view, from the poetry point of view, because it helps people to look at the Bible, whether they believe it as a divine creature's word or whether they know it as an ancient literary text that's historically important. Either way, they can look at it and see that it does have poetry, and it helps to have a book to aid us in looking at the poetry within it.
Yes, and the two approaches don't have to be mutually exclusive. I certainly honor the Bible as ancient literature, but it's also a source of faith. Now, people that think God dictated every word of the Bible probably left this show long ago.
Yes, I'm
Yes.
sure. That's okay with me.
It's okay with me.
We're almost out of time, Sharon Chace. I want to thank you for being on the writer's block again. And my continued congratulations for the good work you're doing in Rockport as Poet Laureate.
Thank you. I think I'm supposed to be quiet now.
Thank you, Sharon. I want to thank our TV audience for being with us as well. If you've learned something about poetry being in the Bible or part of the Bible, embedded or standalone as it is with the Psalms, then the writer's block has done its job. And I hope to see you again next week on the writer's block. Good night.